Okay. I went ahead and started it, so whenever you guys are ready, go
ahead. Welcome to Books, Booze, and Brains, a book club for the scientifically curious. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the show. Every month, we meet at the Broken Beaker in Indianapolis to discuss a popular science book with an expert in that book's field. Please enjoy the following excerpts from our discussion on Musicophilia, Tales of Music and the Brain by Oliver Sacks.
Dr. Meganne Masko. She's going to be our resident expert for the evening, and I will let her go ahead and introduce herself.
Hi. So I'm Meganne Masko. I'm an assistant professor of music and arts technology at IUPUI, just a few blocks away. And I've been a board certified therapist for a decade now. And before that, I was a music teacher. And before that, I was an opera singer. So I've done almost everything a person can do in the field of music. So that's what I do. And I teach. So I'm shaking my head because that happens literally every day when I was working as a clinician. So I would say probably in my career, my primary clinical focus before I became an academic was end-of-life care. And so I had a large caseload of patients who had Alzheimer's and other related dementias. And then as an academic and a clinician and having students who were going through practicum, they would spend a lot of time working with patients with Alzheimer's and related dementias. So I think at last count I was over 1,000 Alzheimer's patients that I've helped care for. And it's very common. And I've had patients who had end-stage dementia, and I've had patients who were actively dying who would still sing along with me. They couldn't produce sentences anymore, but they could sing Johnny Cash, they could sing Home on the Range, they could sing. One of my favorite stories was I had a woman who was a hospice patient, end-stage Alzheimer's, and her great-granddaughter had come in with her granddaughter to see her. And her great-granddaughter also really loved Johnny Cash. And so I started playing Walk the Line, and her little, she was probably like 5 years old, started singing Walk the Line with me. And we got to the part where, Johnny sings, because you're mine, and then the next line is, I walk the line. And the little girl was singing with me, and Grandma did not open her eyes. Great-grandma didn't open her eyes, but she sang right along, right in time, perfectly in time.
Wow.
And she actually died later that day.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's, I was just saying that we don't really know why music does the stuff it does, but we have several excellent theories. And one of them is just simply about how the brain processes music. And a lot of people will say, well, we have speech centers in the brain. There is no such thing as a music center in the brain. So unlike a lot of other sensory stimuli that you process as human beings, you don't have one spot that's your music spot, right? So you can have really significant neural damage and still be able to process music, which is why, like Gabby Giffords, who had her brain ripped apart by a bullet, could use music to help regain her speech and her motor movements because you don't have one specific music spot in your brain. The other thing that's really cool about music is that you have redundant systems. So if anybody's a computer person out there, you know that redundant systems are really important, right? One system goes down, you have a backup. Well, the way that your brain processes music, you actually have a backup for your backup for your backup. It's that important. But we don't know why. We don't know why it's that important. But again, we have several excellent theories. So, and that's also part of it. So there's no music gets processed in everything from your brainstem, your hippocampus, which is the seat of memory, and it's one of the oldest parts of your brain, all the way up to your frontal lobes, your neocortex, right, which is the last part of your brain to develop and is the, like the human part of your brain, if we're going to use really old terminology. So there is no music center. It's everywhere, which is one of the reasons why it's so resilient, even in the face of severe injury. So we don't know. Okay, so think about when I talk with students, when I teach music cognition, one of the ways I get students to think about how important music is to the brain is think about all of your other human systems, okay? All the squishy stuff inside your body that keeps you going, right? The more important something is, the more protected it is, right? So like major arteries run through bones. You have, right, your heart gets quite the encasement, right? You have several bones that make up your skull. So the stuff that's really, really important is really, really protected, right? Your brainstem, super protected. Also a very important place where music gets processed in the brain. So things like rhythm get processed in your brainstem, partially processed in your brainstem, which makes sense, right? Lots of other things that are rhythmic happen in your brainstem, like your heart rate, your respiration rate, your circadian rhythm is partially housed there. So cerebellum processes rhythm, and also playing movements, right? So there's one of the reasons why there isn't a music center in the brain is because music is an unbelievably complex signal. So if you think about it, if you think about music, you have rhythm, right? And then you have, let's say you have the melody, okay? But even within melody, you have the fundamental frequency of the pitch, and then you have all of these other little pitches that hang out with the fundamental frequency, and those are called overtones. And the overtones give us what's called timbre. It's a French word, T-I-M-B-R-E. So we have the timbre, which is right how we know that a trumpet is a trumpet, or a xylophone is a xylophone, or even a timpani versus a xylophone. That all has to do with the shape of the signal, which is called the envelope. You're getting a whole lesson in like in acoustics tonight. The envelope, and then the overtones. Okay, so we have rhythm, we have fundamental frequency, and that's if we just have one pitch. Now, if we have multiple pitches, like you're going to go listen to a symphony, then you've got all kinds of fundamental frequencies and all kinds of overtones happening. Plus, then you have the texture of the music, which is all of the pitches happening together and all the different rhythms happening together. And then we throw in the visual cues, right? You also throw in our associated memories, our extra musical memories. And then if we add in lyrics, then we start activating a whole bunch of other centers, right? Then we start activating our speech centers. So different parts of your speech centers get activated. Your occipital lobe is activated. When we have people do that, and we put them into functional MRIs, and we take pictures of what's happening in their brains. I mean, it's like the 4th of July. It's Christmas trees. It's beautiful, right? You have all this activation happening, meaning that the brain's using lots of oxygen and energy all over the place. So depending on what you're doing with music, we see different levels of activation in different places in the brain. And actually for musicians, the thing that makes our brains light up the most is not when we're performing, it's actually when we imagine performing. So when musicians imagine performing, we actually have more neural activity than when we're truly performing. There's just a lot that happens. It's such a complex signal that you kind of can't help but have to use lots of parts of your brain to process it. It is fascinating because we have sort of the two camps. Is music an evolutionary necessity? Did we have to have it for survival? Or is it what's called a spandrel? There's your Words with Friends word for the day. Is it a spandrel? And a spandrel is this idea of auditory cheesecake. It's just an outgrowth of the thing we needed. It's not the thing we needed itself. It's just sort of a happy side effect of the thing that we needed. Now, what's interesting about it is when we look back, and this is where the anthropology comes in. The oldest known instruments, human beings were making bone flutes about 40,000 years ago. And so if you think back 40,000 years ago, you know, what were other things human beings were trying to do 40,000 years ago? I talk a lot about saber-toothed tigers. I'm like, you know, human beings were trying really hard not to get eaten, you know, by other things. We're dying from cold or dying from disease, you know. We're talking, you know, end of an ice age. We've got big issues happening here. But human beings took the time to carve instruments out of animal bones. And those are the ones that we have. Those are the ones that haven't decomposed, right? It's entirely possible that we had other instruments, but they were made out of natural fibers like animal hide or wood, which, you know, they're going to be long gone by now. But it's entirely possible that human beings started out communicating with rhythm, right? Or just intonations, vocal calls, things like that, that then evolved into song and potentially speech. Now, we don't have a time machine, right? We can't go back and solve the argument. But so that's one theory. One theory is that it was an evolutionary benefit. Another sort of piece of evidence that it might be an evolutionary benefit is that, and I hope I'm not going to get in trouble for saying this, but musicians are sexy. And I mean that in an evolutionary biological way. Okay? So it's entirely possible, because we still use music, right, in courting rituals, if you will. We use music when we dance. We use music to create social bonds with people, with other humans. And yeah, music tends to help with the procreation, right? And species survive by procreating and continuing on the species. And I'm trying to be very polite about this. So that's one. Another thought too is that if you've never thought about lullabies, here's your moment to think about lullabies. So if any of you are parents out in the audience, or aunts or uncles or whoever, and you've held a little tiny newborn, right? Human beings are odd that our young come out and they're so defenseless. They rely on us for a significant period of time. It's weird even amongst mammals. So our young really rely on us for a significant period of time. Well, when we sing lullabies, right, or when we're singing to babies in general, typically we put them right here. As they get older, right, then we play with them, and play is how babies learn. So there's also this thought that, you know, if, let's say the saber-toothed tiger is around, okay, and baby's over there because you don't really care about holding baby, right, and then there's a saber-toothed tiger, well, what happens to your offspring? Right? Saber-toothed tiger eats your offspring. Goodbye, species. So, right, there's also potentially a survival benefit to this idea of lullabies and the social bonding, specifically that comes between females and infants. Now, it is something, but it's not a universal language, because in order for something to be a universal language, it should not require any kind of interpretation. You should just understand it, right? And not every culture does it the same way. They don't notate music in Nepal the way that we notate music in Indiana. So that's my argument that it's not universal. Now, what it is it's called a human invariant. Every culture has it. Every culture has music. But we all do it a little bit differently. So like in the West, we operate on the half tones, half notes, whereas in a lot of Eastern cultures, they have quarter tones. We literally cannot hear them. Unless you happen to grow up listening to quarter tone music, you've lost the ability to hear it. It'll just sound like it's out of tune to you, because we can't hear quarter tones. Because our scales are built on half steps and their scales are built on quarter steps. So, right, if it was universal, all the scales would be the same. Mm-hmm. But there are some things that are invariants. How we use music pretty much is the same from culture to culture, and it includes things like courting. For spiritual rituals, we use it for work, we use it for exercise. Every culture sort of does the same things with music. We just do it in different ways.
Yes.
Okay. This is going to be sort of the idiot's guide to epigenomics, but okay, DNA. Imagine DNA. Squiggle it around, okay? So your DNA, unless you do some things, like you could actually have some random mutations that happen. That happens. Every now and again, there's just sort of like a boop, little random mutation that happens. You could be bitten by a radioactive spider. It's pretty unusual for your DNA to just like mutate. Your genome is pretty stable over the course of your lifetime. Now, how your genes get activated changes constantly. So you may have, again, I'm going to go back to the old days, right? This whole idea of nature versus nurture. Well, it's actually both. And we had genotype. Who remembers genotype? And phenotype. Yeah. Okay. So phenotype is really what we're talking about. How the genes get turned on and off and how they get activated and all that stuff. Okay. You have different ways of changing how your genes are activated, and everything affects it. Caffeine actually has a half-life of about 6 hours. So during that 6-hour period, it's changing how your genes are getting activated. So there's lots of stuff that changes how your genes get turned on and off. How much sleep you had last night, what you ate today, all of that, exposure to environmental toxins, all of that. So what happens is you literally have some things that'll stick to the outside of your DNA. And the way I think of them is like those little Velcro balls that you can throw against the wall and they stick to the wall. Okay, so those are methyl groups. They don't look like Velcro balls, but that's the best I can come up with. So those are methyl groups, and methyl groups will change how your DNA is wrapped, and how your DNA is wrapped changes which genes are exposed and which ones get turned on and which ones get turned off. There are other things that come along and change like how much your genes are copying themselves, because your genes are constantly copying themselves. They're constantly moving from DNA to RNA and back and forth and back and forth. And so depending on how much your genes are copying themselves, that's what we call upregulation and downregulation. So regulation has to do with how many copies of a gene are being made at any one time. And some of them we want lots of copies of, right? Like tumor-suppressing genes. Yay! Okay. Cancer-causing genes. Okay. So that's the idiot's guide to epigenomics. It's the stuff that sticks on the outside of your DNA and tells it what to do. So when we talk about epigenomics, we're really talking about the mechanisms that determine how your genes get turned on and off. That's basically it. And so one of the theories about why humans are musical is that on a molecular basis, it actually makes us healthier. And there's a definite survival advantage to that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then that got passed down over the generations.
We have a question over here.
Oh. Yeah, and if you don't use it, you lose it when it comes to your brain. And so when you're born, right up until about the age of 2, you are just full of infinite capability in terms of neural development. And then at about the age of 2, your brain starts to prune back neural connections. And it's just like pruning a bush. And if you haven't used it, you're going to lose it. So if you are not exposed to, say, a tonal language like Mandarin or Thai, you're probably never going to really master, Mandarin or Thai. If you were not exposed to music on a regular basis when you were younger, you're still going to have those. You're still going to have neural connections for music and neural pathways because music is everywhere in our society, but probably not to the extent that I do. I grew up in a family with a mother who was a trained opera singer and a dad who was a trained jazz pianist. Neurologically, you don't have as much capacity to process music as, say, somebody like me who grew up being exposed to a lot of music. Now, you might have been exposed to a lot of other things that I wasn't exposed to, and therefore I don't have that same strength of neural pathway. You could still create neural pathways. We used to think that when you were an adult, you could, like, an old dog can't learn new tricks, but actually we know now that that's not true. Now, the older you get, the less neuroplastic you are, but you're still pretty neuroplastic, meaning that you could still create new neural pathways. But it's not the same as a 2-year-old. Sound organized in time. That is the dictionary definition of music. Sound organized in time. Which is why you have composers like John Cage and his famous piece 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which, if you've ever performed 4 minutes and 33 seconds, is a score full of rests. That's 4 minutes and 33 seconds because his idea was exploring what is music, right? If it's sound organized in time, if we just put a time limit on it, then does all of that ambient sound then become music? He was a troublemaker. Love him. I love him. Love John Cage. So that's the definition is sound organized in time. Sure, why not? I mean, if we want to get kind of avant-garde about things, I don't see why not. I've never held to tradition on anything. Yeah. Hip-hop, I have really learned to love hip-hop over the years. I have my limits. But I have really learned to love hip-hop actually because I'm a music therapist and I worked with incarcerated juveniles, incarcerated young women for a year. And I saw how hip-hop and rap gave them the ability to express this sort of inner emotional turmoil in a way that was socially acceptable and not harmful. So remember when music history, right, when we started really studying classical music history, right, people and it was primarily in the church, it was music that was happening in the church, and people were allowed to sing in octaves, right? That was like rock and roll. And then they were allowed to introduce fifths, and then we got perfect fourths, but there were intervals that you could not have. One of them's the tritone, it's known as the devil in the music, or the diavolo in musica, and essentially like the major seventh chord was kind of like a middle finger to the establishment. I mean, that's kind of, the history of music is really the history of somebody going, yeah, well, watch me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of that is socially constructed, right? Like we think of the Jaws theme, right? You can hear the Jaws theme. That's a minor second, right? Minor seconds are scary. Minor keys tend to be things that are sad or scary, right? The toccata and fugue in D minor by Bach, which is like the quintessential Halloween song, right? We associate minor keys with scary things, darkness. Major keys tend to be happier, and it's because it's all socially constructed, and we've passed it from generation to generation to generation. And so, when babies are born, what do? We start passing along that information. And actually, when they're in utero, they can hear. So hearing's the first sense you develop, and it's the last one you lose when you're in the active dying process, which is why we still sing to people who are actively dying. Yeah. Cayu's the worst. Well, and it's all crafted. It's all crafted specifically for them. They hire educational consultants and artistic consultants to craft all of that for them. When we talk about the addictive nature of music, we can talk about sex, drugs, rock and roll, and gambling, because those are the four things that really get your reward center in your brain going. And your nucleus accumbens is the heart of that reward center and reward system. So, which, again, as a music therapist who works occasionally with people who have addiction issues, right? Because most people, they don't turn off the music in a bar, usually, right? Mm-hmm. So when I work with people who are in recovery, we do talk about the music that they listened to when they used, and we actually do come up with a plan for that. Or do they feel like they can still listen to that music without having the urge to use, or do we need to find alternatives for that? Because it creates what a friend of mine calls a super drug. When we pair all those things together. Yeah. But those shows are crafted to suck those kids in so that you'll pull out your wallet and except for Caillou. Can't stand Caillou. Never says please and thank you. So this is something that has evolved a lot. Even since I was a young student taking biology, we used to say that music, like human beings, were the only musical animals. And I'm not sure that that's really true, because it seems like we're learning more and more. Like there are animals that assign social meaning to music, to the music that they create. Mm-hmm. And so, right, it used to be that humans were the only people animals that made music. And then we were like, well, actually, no. Whales do. Birds sing to sing. There isn't just they sing to talk. They also sing to sing. and there are other animals that create music. Elephants have sort of a kind of music. And then we thought, well, but humans are the ones who use it for social reasons. And we're like, oh, nope, we're wrong about that too. So I don't know. Maybe we're not that special. Mating songs, yeah, so animals actually use music in a lot of the same ways that humans do too. But oh yeah, this is a huge debate. This is way outside of my wheelhouse, but I do enjoy watching them yell at each other in academic journals.
Okay, we're gonna wrap up. Quick announcement.
Special thanks to our featured speaker, Meganne Masko. Our team is Cari, Tsinovoi, Leah, Nahmias, and Melanie Fox. Books, Booze, and Brains is a partnership between Indiana Humanities, Central Indiana Science Outreach, the Indiana State Museum, and March for Science Indianapolis. Our live stream was brought to you in part by a grant from Indiana Sciences. Music was provided by Sunset Pig. You can listen to Springtime Stretch, the song featured in this video, and other songs at sunsetpig.bandcamp.com. This video was produced by denkbots, which you can find at denkbots on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Kyle Turpin is our recording engineer. My name is Rufus Cochran, and as always, learn, create, inspire.